So today we'll be doing lesson 4 of our book, that is physical and chemical changes, right? Just as when you see this topic, you must be saying that ma'am, we have already done this chapter in our 6th standard, physical and chemical changes. Do we need to repeat the chapter? No, my dear students, we will not repeat everything, but yes, we will learn and we will discuss this chapter in more depth, in more detail, right? We will learn more terms related to the chapter, okay? Depth understanding we are going to have today. So firstly, let me make you clear what extra terms you will learn in this chapter. As the name of the chapter is physical and chemical changes, right? But do you know physical and chemical changes takes place in a substance, right? And all the substances are made up of matter, okay? Now, as per this matter term, all the substances are made up of matter. This term is clear to you? You already have studied about what matter is. Matter is anything that occupies space and has mass is called matter, right? But for this term substance, matter is divided in two categories, that is pure substances and impure substances, right? Impure substances we also call it mixtures. So now our main task will be to learn and to gain better understanding of these two terms. What are pure substances? What are impure substances? As you know, you must be saying, ma'am, matter is of 3 types, that is solid, liquid and gas. We already have studied this. And you are saying matter is of 2 types, pure substances and impure substances. So my dear students, this term matter, as per the substances, we divided into 2 categories, pure and impure. No doubt, these pure substances and impure substances both can be solid, liquid or gaseous, right? But in general, it is divided in 2 categories, pure and impure substances. These pure substances means any matter which is having only one kind of atoms or more atoms of different elements but all of the same type. For example, we divided further into categories elements and compounds. So mainly our topics of today will be elements, what are elements, what are compounds and what are mixtures. And what is the difference between elements, compounds and mixtures, right? So firstly, let us do element topic. What are elements? Students, element is a substance that cannot be broken down, into more simpler substances. Okay, so what are elements? Element is a substance that cannot be broken down. Now this question must be striking in your mind, ma'am, why this cannot be broken down? Why we cannot break this down into more simpler substances? The reason is because elements are made up of atoms. Okay, elements are made up of tiny particles called atoms. So we will say it is, and you all know very well, atom is the smallest particle which cannot be further divided. That means since elements are made up of atoms, atom is the smallest particle. That is the reason that elements cannot be further divided into simpler substances, right? So what we will say, element is a substance substances as element or elements are made up of atoms, and to these atoms we say these are the smallest particles, right? So what are the examples of elements? For example, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. All these are made up of what atoms? Of the same kind of atoms. Means carbon is made up of carbon atoms, hydrogen is made up of hydrogen atoms, oxygen is made up of oxygen atoms. So we will call these as elements. We will call these as elements, right? So what are the elements? Substance that cannot be broken down because it is made up of atoms, right? So by this term atoms, one more term is related to this which is there in your syllabus, and that is atomicity. The term is atomicity. Now what is atomicity? See, some elements are there, right, which are made up of single atoms, but atoms of such elements cannot exist individually. Means they need some more atoms to combine, only then they can exist. Means some of the elements exist in pairs, right? Next is there are some more elements, the atoms of which needs more than two elements to combine. Okay, so that means they need more and more atoms to combine to exist. So I'll give you some examples. For example, now what do you mean by atomicity? Atomicity means number of atoms in a molecule of an element. Right? So what is atomicity? Atomicity is defined as number of atoms in a molecule of an element. For example, see, helium, neon. Okay. Hydrogen, oxygen. Next, S4 for example, and P8. So in these three cases, I'll discuss the different types of atomicity. Right? For example, here, this helium and neon. These two elements, their atoms can exist individually. That means helium and neon, they both are, since they are having only one atom, they can exist individually. Therefore, they are called as monoatomic. Okay. Next example, H2 and O2. H2 means hydrogen doesn't exist individually. The two atoms of hydrogen exist in pairs. That means H2 here stands for hydrogen. Okay. So hydrogen and oxygen, as they exist in pairs, so we will say the atomicity of hydrogen and oxygen is 2, because two atoms, they exist in pairs. So we will call it as diatomic elements. Right? Next, for example, S4 and P8 means sulfur, the 4 atoms exist, and phosphorus, P, here 8 atoms exist in group. So that means if the atomicity is more than 2, then we will call it polyatomic elements. We call it polyatomic elements. Right? So this is all about monatomic, diatomic and polyatomic elements. Right? So next, this topic is related to the atomicity, means the number of atoms in a molecule of an element. So now let's discuss further about compounds. Our next topic will be compounds. Here I have explained you what are elements, what is atomicity, and what are the different kinds of atomicity that is in our syllabus. Next is we will talk about compounds, right? So regarding compounds, firstly let me tell you how the compounds are formed, right? What are compounds? How they are formed? So compounds, they are formed when two or more elements combine to form a molecule. For example, but here we have to see that they should combine chemically and in a fixed proportion. They should combine chemically in a fixed proportion. So what is compound? Compounds are formed when atoms of, if we talk about at the atomic state, then we will say compounds are formed when atoms of two or more elements combine chemically in a fixed proportion. In a fixed proportion. Right, students? So what are compounds? Compounds are formed when atoms of two or more elements, and they should combine how? They should combine chemically. And how should they combine? In a fixed proportion, right? So these are the three things which we need to understand and which we need to take care of whenever we are defining any molecule as a compound. Then we have to check these three things. If the molecule is satisfying all these three things, that is that molecule should be made up of two or more elements, they should combine chemically, and third condition is in a fixed proportion. Only then we will call them as compounds, right? So this thing is clear to you that ma'am, we have to check these three conditions, but how? Let me explain you by an example. I am rubbing it so that I can have more space. Okay. So here I have written the definition for compounds. Let's take an example and see whether all these three conditions are satisfying in an example or not. For example, let me take an example of water. Okay, H2O. This is the formula for water. This is the formula of water. You know, in this formula, every molecule of water consists of two atoms of hydrogen and one atom of oxygen. That means this compound H2O, is it formed by two or more elements? Yes, because it is combining of hydrogen and oxygen. Two atoms of hydrogen and one atom of oxygen. Okay, so let's take the next. Combine chemically. See, hydrogen and oxygen. When we have hydrogen and oxygen, otherwise you know very well, they exist as gases. They exist as gases. But water, which is formed by the hydrogen and oxygen, that is water in liquid state. Okay, so you must be saying, ma'am, hydrogen and oxygen both are gases, but when they combine, they form water, that is liquid in state. How is it possible? It cannot be possible if some physical mean is used to mix them. But here we are using chemical means. That means we are combining hydrogen and oxygen by some chemical process. And what the chemical process is? Example, electrolysis. Okay, so we are combining hydrogen and oxygen and getting the water which is liquid in state. Here hydrogen having gaseous state, right? So that means the properties of the constituents are different than the properties of the product. What is there? The properties of the product, the properties of the compound is different than the properties of the constituent. So that is the property of compounds, because they are combining chemically, and you know very well, in a chemical change some new substances form, and the properties of that new substance is just different from its constituents, right? So what we will say, properties of compound is different from its constituents, Next, so this is second point, third point, now let's say fourth point, right? Again, when we need to split this water into two forms, hydrogen and oxygen, will it be done physically? No. Again, this also requires some chemical means. That means compound can be split into its constituents by some chemical process. For example, say by passing electric current. What is done? This element is changed in this compound is changed into its elemental form, into its constituents, right? Fifth is energy changes takes place. Energy changes takes place. Why? Because it's a chemical reaction, and inside the chemical reaction always energy changes there. Either energy is released or energy is absorbed. So what happens? That means whenever any compound is getting formed, energy changes will take place, right? And ratio of volume and ratio of mass is also same. We will say in a fixed proportion they have to combine. What does it mean? That ratio of mass should be same. Ratio of mass or volume, it should be same when some compound is getting formed. How? For example, you are saying H2O. Ratio of volume is 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. So ratio should be 2:1. If ratio is 2:2, it will not be water. It will be H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. If the ratio is 2:2, ratio of volume, then the hydrogen peroxide will form, not water. So that means for water to get formed, the ratio should be 2:1. That means it should be mixed in a fixed proportion. Right? So for the compounds, all these three conditions must be satisfied. They should be consisting of 2 or more elements. Next is they should combine chemically, and the third is they should be mixed in a fixed proportion, right? So all these three things satisfy the conditions for compounds, okay? So next time, all these are about compounds, about the elements. Next, let me give you a brief introduction of what are mixtures. What are mixtures? So here, I am writing about mixtures. So what are mixtures? When mixtures are formed, when two or more substances are mixed, mixed means by any physical means, okay, and not in a fixed proportion. pakoras for you when it is raining outside and you are ready to eat pakoras. So what she does, she just mixes some flour, okay, with some ingredients like baking soda, salt, pinch of salt, turmeric, onions, potato and all. She is mixing all these things. But is there any fixed proportion that she should take this much salt only, this much potatoes only then she'll be able to make pakoras? No, there is no fixed proportion, right? And she is not using any chemical means, she is not passing current or she is not doing any other thing, okay, for this chemical chain. What she is doing, she is just mixing all these things, right? So if no chemical mean is used, no fixed proportion is used, that means what you will get? You will get the mixtures. Okay, for example, let me give an example of salt solution. Salt solution. And second example is, let me mix some iron with sulfur. Okay, these are the two examples of mixtures. Salt solution. In salt solution, what will happen? Some salt will be mixed with water. Physically, you can mix it, you will get a salt solution, means you will get a mixture. And second is, for example, some iron filling is there, you are adding sulfur to it. What will happen? When you will bring a magnet towards this mixture, only the iron filling will be attracted towards magnet, not the sulfur. So that means it is not having, mixture is not having definite set of properties, okay? So that means properties of mixtures will be just opposite to this compounds. What will happen? In case of chemical, here in mixtures, we can combine physically. In this, properties of compounds is different. Here, the properties will remain same. As it was the property of salt before mixing it in water, the same will remain after mixing in water, because you can separate salt and water by evaporation process. That means by a physical process. While in case of elements, some chemical means is done to break down back, right? Here you can do it physically by evaporation process. No energy changes because it's a physical process. Energy changes takes place, okay? So in that manner, it is just different from compounds. You can see the different properties, how it is different, right? So today we have discussed about pure substances and impure substances. Pure substances, elements and compounds, and impure substances means mixtures. Next time we will learn about chemical symbols, formula, chemical formula, how to prepare a chemical formula, how we can write the chemical formula, okay, and how balanced equation is, how an equation, chemical equation can be balanced. All these things we will learn in our next class. Till then, just watch the video and read your book for the same chapter. Thank you. Have a nice day.